And is everyone able to see that? Awesome. And Chelsea, if you want, just let me know when to advance, then I will do that.
Sounds good. Yeah, so this webinar is with Stacey Barlow, and she's going to be talking about creating a culture of care using restorative practices. This is the second of our six professional development series offerings. So we're excited that some of you are here. And if you're watching this on the recording, we're glad that you're watching this. I think you can go to the next slide. Just a reminder about who we are and what we do. We are part of the Maine Prevention Network. So myself, Regan, and Alyssa do tobacco prevention through the Maine CDC. And we also have our substance use partners. Laura is on the call right now. And we work closely with communities, schools, different public health organizations, municipalities, and we work with the CDC to implement evidence-based programming and all other sorts of things. And then a couple more things we offer: training and education, prevention initiatives, and then also being able to connect people to treatment and also work with some treatment providers in our high school right now. And this is just our contact and which towns we work in. So you'll see our names and our towns. If you have any questions or need to get in contact with one of us and don't know where to look, these are where we work. So it should help you. We can pop our emails in the chat as well. But I believe you can go to the next one. Our next series is going to be on December 16th with our Healthy Eating Active Living team. They're going to be talking about Alliance for Healthier Generations, Healthiest Schools initiative, and being able to help you get your school on board with that. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up through that link in the flyer that we've shared. And then January 20th, we'll have Gina Brodsky helping, or that is, I think this one's about Gina, right? January?
Yeah. Yes.
She's going to be talking about supporting students impacted by family substance use.
I will also put the flyer in the chat in just a moment because each little calendar date clicks right to the registration. I think that's our last little introductory slide. So I will stop sharing. And I think we are all set to hand it over to Stacey. So Stacey's going to share her screen from here. She'll introduce herself and we'll jump into our topic. And Stacey, if you just want to let us know whether you'd, like to take open questions, I'll be monitoring the chat. But if you're comfortable with people just kind of coming off mute, or if you how you prefer it, just let us know. But thank you so much and take it away.
Well, thank you. I'm absolutely fine with just say what you need to say, speak out. I'm totally comfortable with that. Hopefully some more folks will join us. Poor Laura's already heard this show a couple of times. Lisa, what school district do you work at?
Hi there. I'm from Kennebunk.
Nice.
I teach at the middle school, so I have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders.
Oh, wonderful. I used to work at Marshwood Middle School for a while. And Laura, we've met before, but it's nice to see you again. And so just a little background about me. I am a Southern Maine resident. I live in Springville. And prior to my role, I'm currently the Restorative Practices coordinator at the Maine School Safety Center, which is a part of the Department of Education. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go on, just because I'm discovering as I go. They send me on tour a lot to talk to different groups, and I realize a lot of people haven't heard of our department, which has been around just 3 years. Is that right? No, 5 years, since 2020. But so I'll share a little bit more about that as we go. But prior to my starting this role in March of 2022, I was the principal of the alternative high school in Rochester, New Hampshire. It's in Spalding. So I worked with between 125 and 150 system involved high school students. It was a wild time most of the time. And I was hired originally to work with juniors and seniors, and they would come to me, kids who'd been in trouble with police, but also suspended high levels of exclusionary discipline in school. And then were also struggling academically, and they would come to me with 3 or 4 credits, needing 26 to graduate. And and then the directive was, help them graduate on time. And I'd be like, wait, they're 23 credits short. It's unlikely we're going to pull that off in a year. So we made the switch to focusing on the 8th grade to freshman year transition, and then also emphasizing becoming a fully restorative program. And what that meant was training our full staff so we were a school within a school, 125 kids in a broader school of 1,500 or so. And but our students were, ate in the same cafeteria, rode the same buses, went to the same art classes, interacted in the hallways, but we're really just within program for academics. And prior to switching to being a restorative program, we had a graduation rate in 4 years of about 18%, which is pretty dismal. When we switched to being restorative, our first cohort, and these numbers have been sustained since then, hovers around 87 to 90% of our students in that program graduating with the kids they started their freshman year with, so graduating in 4 years. We also reduced in the first year exclusionary discipline for our students by 65%, which both those numbers I thought, I'm not a math person. I was a social studies teacher. I'm all about the feelings. And I kept saying, I must have screwed this up. I must have done the math wrong. So I kept sending it back to my math friends like, no, you did it. It's right. So that was astonishing. But even more astonishing was, you can imagine in an alt program of that size with the behaviors we see, that staff turnover is pretty intense. And I started to realize after the first year that, wait, we still have the same people we had last year. And then as we went on, in the 5 years that I was there as the restorative program, they have only lost 2 teachers. One of them was me. And then the other was deployed. So in some ways I'm like, oh, that's kind of not, she had no choice. But but I'll never forget a math teacher telling me that she was not going to be doing my kumbaya bullshit, were her words, that she didn't want to do this touchy-feely stuff. But I said, well, this is what we're doing, but please don't quit, because losing a math teacher in an alt school is really, really hard to replace. But at the end of the year, she told me that she wasn't going to leave and that these were the best kids we'd ever had, which they definitely were, the most challenging kids we'd ever had, actually. But additionally, she said, I've never gotten past chapter 5. And she taught pre-algebra, which is our lowest level math class. And most of our kids had not passed a single math class in middle school. So they were really, they're probably functioning on a, maybe middle elementary level math skills place. And she said, but we got through chapter 9 this year. And I kept saying, well, what do you think happened? What's different? And she said, really, it's that I'm not putting out fires every day, that we're actually able to attend to what we're doing because the kids like me and I like them. And that was really, that really was a change. So I came to the DOE, to the safety center. I'm the first person in this role. This hasn't existed before. And I spent the first year really traveling around the state, talking to schools, talking to staff and parents and students to see what's out there to support schools and what can we do. And I also just finished my doctorate this spring. And one of the things that came up in my research is that a third of the teachers in Maine are teachers who came to education without an education degree. They are alternative certification folks. So they never had a classroom management class. And so they don't feel confident responding to some of the dysregulated behaviors we're seeing in the classroom. They really, when things get scary, they send the kids to the principal. So what happens is the principal is dealing, or the dean of students, or whoever's dealing with behaviors, is dealing with minor behaviors all day. Someone won't put their phone away, they said a swear word, whatever. and then they don't have time to deal with the serious things. And so our goal really is to help staff learn how to respond to minor behaviors in the classroom, because we've built relationships with those students so that kids stay in the class. We're not suspending or expelling kids as often. And we're also able to, if a kid blows it up in your classroom today, we can repair that harm. So tomorrow when they come, you're not like, oh God, he's back. I was really hoping you'd be absent today, or something like, which I do remember having those feelings at points in my education career. So that's sort of the overarching view. But the way that the reason I'm here and in relationship with Chelsea and Regan and Alyssa is that one of the things that I came to our notice is when you look at the suspension numbers in Maine, and I think it's at the next slide. Let me just look. Yeah, so the year that we have the most recent data for, they do the behavior data by calendar years. So we just are now starting to get the 2024 data. But in 2023, in Maine, generally speaking, kids below 6th grade can't be suspended unless they do something really outrageous. So we have between 84 and 89,000 kids who are old enough to be suspended in Maine, so 6th to 12th graders. And we had 15,432 suspensions in 2023, which is stunning when you look at, out of 84,000 kids. And more alarming is in this number is that these aren't days out, these are suspensions. So some of these numbers could represent 10 days out. So too many kids are out of school. And one of the things that we were able to break that data down is that 6,069 of these are for illicit substance use or other, knowing that marijuana is a separate category and alcohol is a separate category. So there isn't a specific question about vaping, but reading between the lines, this is probably for vaping that kids are being suspended, because it would be a different category if it was drugs or alcohol. And so knowing that, I got partnered with the CDC and the MPN partners to start developing a restorative response to vaping in school, so that we can shift the narrative from vaping at school being a behavior problem and recognize that it is actually a health problem, a public health problem, and an addiction. And this is turning out to be a trickier, this is a big one. Lots of people have lots of feelings about this subject. And then we are chronically under-resourced in Maine with people to support students with addiction. So we're trying to find the best way to partner to help schools to support kids, help them with this addiction. Because honestly, if we send them home for a 10-day suspension, what are they going to be doing? It's going to be, vaping it up, not watching a video about how to quit vaping. I'm pretty solidly sure that's not what they're doing when they're home. So that's really how we came together. But foundationally, this doesn't work. A restorative response to vaping doesn't work unless the school is also functioning from a restorative place and and respond to all behaviors in a restorative way, which really means considering how helping students to learn to be accountable, and I dare say helping adults to learn to be accountable, because that's a problem in a lot of schools, well, culturally, but helping the adults feel comfortable to make mistakes, helping the kids feel okay about making mistakes, so that we can have hard conversations, so that we can be comfortable asking for what we need, and so that we and training our students and our staff to understand how to repair harm when it happens, rather than ignoring things, blowing them up, letting it go, or kicking kids out of school, which is, unfortunately, we are awfully punitive in the United States right now. But a lot of schools will say to me, restorative justice, restorative practices, that's, the flavor of the month. And anyone who's worked in a school has been through all the initiatives, and they last a year and then they disappear. And so there is resistance from staff to create new things. But this restorative practices, so first of all, restorative justice is the philosophy of using this. So restorative justice is sort of a social philosophy. meaning that people are accountable for the harm they cause. The community comes together to repair that harm. And then we're done. We leave it. We make an agreement about how we're going to fix it. People are held to making certain that that agreement is met, and then the person is welcomed back into the community and we move on. Restorative practices is how you do that. I know people get confused about the two different expressions, but it's been around for hundreds of years in Native American populations, Maori in New Zealand, First Nation in Canada, African, European. So it's not a new thing, but it came into Western culture as a victim-centered alternative to criminal justice in Canada and in New Zealand. In Canada, it started with a group of boys who were driving around knocking down people's mailboxes and smashing them. And there was a overexcited judge who wanted to put them in jail, or juvie as they called it in those days. And someone who had experience from a First Nation community said, well, why don't we help them understand why this is a problem? Because they were really just caught up in the excitement of what they're doing. We'll help them understand how it affected people, and then let's let them fix what they broke. And so that was really the first place that it started. And there, what I've read the accounts of it was really pivotal was an older woman who was waiting for her, I don't know, the Canadian version of Social Security check. And because her mailbox was knocked down, she didn't get it for 10 days. And for the kids to understand, like, that's how it harmed her. And then, for them to really see that, our behavior has a ripple effect. And that it's not always just about you, despite the fact that most adolescents think that, in fact, they are the center of the universe. At least that's been my experience with my own children. And then it entered the educational world as an alternative to zero tolerance policies, mostly around the times of the war on drugs. But a lot of schools are still living in this space of, if you get in a fight, you're out for 10 days. I don't really care what happened. I don't know, it really doesn't matter to me what's going on with you. We're just, these are the rules. This is how it goes. And we're not going to, and very often, and this is an important piece, is that the people who are harmed are left out of that equation. So in retributive school discipline, which is basically what we've been doing for a long time until you've made the switch to restorative, and also in the legal system, we ask what rule or law was broken. So, what did you do? What rule, why are you in trouble now? Who did it? Who broke it? And then how do we punish them? We don't, and in this equation, when we look at retributive discipline, the person left out, or the people left out, are the people who were harmed. In a restorative response, we ask what harm was caused. So what's actually broken here? What's damaged? Most often it's truly the relationship between the people who are in conflict, or maybe the person who felt like they were deceived, or so the relationships. Occasionally, physical things are broken, but most often, especially in schools, it's really the relationship between a student and a teacher, when the student shouted at the teacher, or kids who are in conflict with each other. Then we ask, what are the needs and obligations of everyone involved in this situation? So the people who are harmed have the opportunity to say, one, how they felt when what happened, and also what they need to feel better about it. But we also help the person who caused the harm to identify what was happening in you at that time. What did you feel in your body? What were you feeling emotionally? Were you embarrassed? Were you angry? Because what we're trying to help them learn is, you're going to feel that way again. If you're ashamed, you'll feel ashamed again. That these emotions recycle through life. But what can you do differently next time, so that maybe it's only 80% as bad as what you did this time, and then next time maybe it's only 50%, so that there's growth and that there's understanding, but also comfort that you have the ability to fix this. So that, and from an academic perspective, that makes it safe to take chances at school. Because if you made a mistake, you still know that you can fix it, that it's not the end of the world. And I've seen so many of my students with such almost debilitating anxiety, where the fear of making a mistake made them almost non-functional at school. They were just afraid of being made fun of, afraid of failing a class, so that they never took chances, and they were reluctant to stretch. So not only does this have behavioral implications, but it also has the implication of really increasing academic performance as well. And then the last piece of the process is that how should all affected, so people who are harmed and the people who cause harm, what's each of our obligations so that we can make this as right as possible and that we can move on. And then really defining what does accountability look like. An important part of this process is that it is a voluntary process, and the people who are harmed have to be willing to participate. We never force this on someone. If someone is traumatized or terrified of, maybe there's been a fight, maybe there's some severe bullying happening, we don't force this on people who are harmed. Sometimes we come back around to it as things settle down, but we never completely close the option of using traditional school discipline because sometimes people don't want to participate. The other piece that's really critical is the person who caused the harm or the people who caused the harm have to be willing to admit they did it. They have to be accountable for it. Not in a shaming way, but in a way that makes them, just so that we can move on. It's not a trial. And another important piece of this is whatever happens in a restorative process is not admissible in a legal setting or in if there's a suspension or expulsion that eventually it comes out of this situation. It's sort of like otherwise it's putting the person who caused the harm in a dangerous space if they've already admitted they're guilty and taking away their legal rights if things escalate. So this is a standalone process. It's not, we don't say, yeah, well, in the circle, he said he did this. If somehow it moves on to a higher level, that's left out. And that's people who are a part of this when we're responding to a serious behavior, sign a disclaimer and have that very carefully explained to them. But what we're looking at and what's foundational to our program and also building a school that feels safe for students. We started with 3 essential questions. Oh, Alyssa, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I was just quickly going to ask, I'm wondering, when you gave the example of like students, like when you have go through this restorative approach,
Yeah.
like giving them a chance, and you give the example of like maybe next time you react or don't, like you react 80% less and then maybe 50% less. I'm wondering how you kind of approach that in some of those more serious offenses, for lack of a better word. And I know that those are usually not quite as common as maybe we think that they are. But I'm wondering, like you mentioned, like severe bullying or things like that. How do you approach the conversation there so that not to take away the fact that people are still human and can make mistakes, but like we obviously don't want that really occurring ever again. And I'm just sort of wondering how the approach there might differ a little bit.
Well, in a severe situation, we do something called a restorative conference, which is not something in our program. We don't train all staff and all teachers to do this because people sometimes get a little carried away and suddenly want to do these conferences for, someone dropped the F-bomb or something. And this is really for like severe things.
Right.
But one of the things, let me just see if I can show it to you. All restorative processes are built around, I'm just going to see if I can switch to a different presentation I was just looking at to share with you so I can show you these questions.
Yeah. Happy to, wait till the end and come back to this as well.
It's an important question and I wanted to make it clear. So this presentation I'm filing through is our implementation team training. Just so you know, it's a 3-day thing.
So we'll all be here until Friday.
Yeah, so I won't. I will spare you all that. But what we focus on really is there's 5 questions for the person who caused the harm, and 5 questions for the people. Oh, here it is. Okay. For the people who were harmed. So what we're really helping them focus on is it'll come eventually. My computer's been so slow today. And this is something that you do with Fidelity every time you're having one of these conferences, or when you're having a conversation about a minor behavior, you use these questions. So we give schools, everyone gets a lanyard with these questions for every staff member to use them. So we walk the person who's caused the harm through what happened. And what happened is really important to use those exact words, not like, hey, why'd you shove him? or, what were you doing in the bathroom, or whatever it might be. But what happened, which is really gives someone the opportunity to tell the whole story and their side of the story. And I will tell you that I've never asked that question and not gotten information that I didn't have before. Like I, would often, and I think a lot of teachers go into and administrators go into the conversation thinking they know what's been on. And now they're like, oh, there's always more. There's always more to it. So it's a very neutral way of asking. And then what were you thinking or feeling at the time? And kids will say, and I would probably argue adults too, is the truth is they were not thinking, they were feeling. And so help them drill down to, well, what were you feeling? I was embarrassed. I was scared. They'll always say, I was really mad. Well, why? What were you mad about? Let's get down to like, what happened that made you feel, and what is that? And then what does that feel like in your body when you're angry? And then what have you thought or felt since? Almost always, I wish I hadn't done it, is the answer. And then who has been affected by what happened and in what way? Kids will address the person in front of them or whoever they had the conflict, but they often don't get like, well, what about me? I was in the middle of a meeting as a principal and I had to come out now. I just had to leave my meeting. What about your mom who's now having to leave work to come pick you up? And now she has to tell her boss. What about her work partner? Helping them see, like, not in a shame-inducing way in any way, but seeing that your choices have a broader implication. And then what do you think needs to be done to make things right? These questions are the same, whether it's a minor situation in classroom or a broader, someone, set the bathroom trash can on fire. That was something one of my students did. And then so we're helping them work their way through that, even if they did a really bad thing. Because what happened, and then these are the questions for those who were harmed. So what happened is we always start with that again. And then what did you think when you realized what had happened? Because sometimes people, like I know when someone's done something mean to me, I'm like, maybe there's that, they didn't really mean to do that. And then when you're finally like, oh, they did, that's a really yucky feeling. And then just, what has this impact has this had on you? What's been the hardest? And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? So we start with those, but in the conference in that we're doing with the students, what we're also looking at is building that harm repair agreement. So what happens when we, so, I mean, I can tell you guys a story, like an example. Would that be helpful? Like something that happened to my students. So, I don't know, Lisa, when you were, I don't know if your school had the devious licks problem after, COVID, which was this TikTok challenge. And Laura, I don't know if you've worked in schools, but there was this TikTok challenge that was break something at your school or steal something at your school and then record yourself doing it and and then wonder why you get suspended. But it was ridiculous. Our school was out of control. Kids were pulling toilets off the wall. One of my students came into class all strutting in after lunch with this weird little slimy trail behind him. And I'm like, where were you? What was happening at lunch? He's like, nothing. What's your problem? I'm like, I'm just curious about the slime trail. And he had stolen the soap dispenser in the bathroom and put it in his backpack, but upside down. So it was leaking soap all around because that was his challenge, right? But one of my students, Dylan, who was a big strapping kid, he was on the football team. His family really struggled. He'd been suspended 6 times for 10 days in 8th grade. He was a freshman. This is around Halloween. He hadn't been suspended yet with us, which was really exciting. He'd come close, but we'd been keeping it together. Well, his father had passed away the year before from an overdose. And mom was working really hard. She had an hourly wage job though, money was really tight. And they had a younger brother who's 5, or 4. He was 4, he was still in daycare. And so Dylan decided with the challenge of his friends we were down to 2 open bathrooms in the building because the things had gotten so bad for 1,500 kids. So you had 2 boys and 2 girls. So the bathrooms were very precious. He decides to rip off the stall door in one of the bathrooms because his friends called him the P word, and you can't resist that. And he tried to put it out the window, which I never quite understood. And then, of course, another teacher saw, of course, Barlow's kids are down in the bathroom throwing the doors out the window. So, the principal of the building came in. He's like, and at that point, it was a 10-day automatic 10-day suspension, and they were going to charge kids because they were so tired of this experience. So I'm like, can we please work with Dylan and do a restorative process? Because I don't, we've been working so hard to develop trust. And so he agreed to do it. Let us do the next day. And I had a chance to check in with his mom, and then other folks who were affected by it. So the next day, Dylan came. He did go home for that afternoon, but he came back the next day around noon. And in our conference, this is a higher level behavior response. In the conference was myself and Dylan. Dylan was allowed to bring a friend for support. The custodian asked to be there, and Dylan and the custodian had a good relationship, but the custodian actually wanted to be there as someone who was harmed, which Dylan didn't realize, but that's why he was there. And then I was also teaching a class when this all went down, and I had to leave my class with the ed tech to go deal with Dylan's antics. And another student asked to be there as well. And so we started the process, and the way it starts is that the person who caused the harm, we ask them what happened, and we go through those questions that I shared. And Dylan was kind of smug about it. He's like, well, Jaden dared me to do it, and what could I do? And I know you're all pissed at me, and blah, blah. But, he wasn't, he admitted what happened, but he wasn't really owning much about it. So then what happens next is the people who were harmed get their chance to share how it affected them. And so the other students said, hey, I want to get out of this program, and I need to get good grades to do that. And we were reviewing for a test or summative exam when Miss B had to leave. And now we didn't get a review, and I'm going to fail the test, and that's on you, and you're not as cool as you think you are. And you could see Dylan was like, oh, yeah, okay. Like he thought it was kind of cool thing that he did. And then the custodian had his turn to speak, and he's like, I love you, buddy, but normally I leave work at 4, and last night I was here till 7 because I had to fix the bathroom door because we've only got 2 bathrooms open, and people need a stall door. And I didn't have what I needed, so I had to go to Home Depot, and it took some time. But I didn't leave till 7, and I missed my son's band concert. And it was like that 4th grade Hot Cross Buns band concert where everyone, has their chance to play. We've all suffered through those. He's like, and so my son was so upset. And then when I got home, my wife and I got in a big fight because she said I care more about my job than my son, which isn't true. I have to also have a job to feed my son. But he's like, but yeah, I'm pretty mad at you because what you did affected my family. And then, and you could see Dylan starting to get like, oh, it never occurred to him. It never occurred to him who fixed the dumb things that he breaks, or cleans up when he makes a mess. And then the last person was his mom to speak, and she said, and he's like, I know, Mom, I know you're mad at me. She's like, yes, indeed I am. But what you need to know is because I had to leave yesterday to come get you when you got in trouble, and then I had to take more time off work today. And in the spring, you were suspended all those times, and I had to leave work. When I asked my boss today if I could leave to come to this, he wrote me up and said I've been missing too much work. And so she said, so your behavior could cost me my job. And Dylan really understood that, and again, we're not doing this to shame him, but for him to understand like the implications. And then she said, but that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is yesterday when I picked up your brother from daycare, I was 29 minutes late, which means $29. The daycare was $1 a minute when you're late, which they didn't have to spare. And she said, and he was so upset because he was worried that what had happened to Daddy had happened to me. And he was devastated. And Dylan was, his little brother means the world to him. So he really understood. So then we talked about how do we fix these things. So the student who felt frustrated that he hadn't had his review, Dylan stayed with me. Dylan was able to stay at school. He stayed with me that day. And he and I made a Kahoot, these little review games. It's kind of like Jeopardy because he'd already taken the test. So he knew what was on it. So he made a Kahoot for the class that missed their review. And so he and I had some time together, rebuilding our relationship. He was able to repair that harm. And the beautiful thing was that everyone in that class passed that when they did take the test. So he felt really proud that he created this great review, and it was sort of good for his self-esteem. With the custodian, we agreed that he would stay 2 days a week for 3 days, for 2 days a week for 3 weeks. after school because there had been lots of painting on the bathroom stalls, artwork, poetry in the bathroom. And so he couldn't fix the door he broke because it had already been fixed. But what he could do is help the custodian with other projects. So he stayed and helped the custodian to paint the bathrooms where the kids had done other graffiti. And the mom agreed that the custodian could then drop Dylan off at his brother's daycare so that Dylan could walk his brother home and mom could stay a little later at work and make up the work that she'd missed. And so everyone sort of had their like repair with Dylan as to how how we would fix what he broke. And the important piece of this that I always emphasize with schools is that in that agreement, and it's a written agreement, and I would monitor it, and we had specific deadlines and dates. And at the very end of it said, if this does not happen by November 15th or whatever the date was, Dylan will be suspended for 10 days. So that there isn't this sense of, well, he'll just pretend to do it and it'll all go away. It's not going away. And so to get all the way back to Alyssa's original question is how do we address it? What we really address is really helping that person understand the impact of their behavior and then supporting them as they develop those skills to repair it. Is that helpful? It's a long story.
Yeah, absolutely. The context is certainly helpful. And for all those people to be willing to come to the table and have that conversation is great. So.
It is, and it's hard. And sometimes people, there's a lot of pre-work that goes into these into those conferences for sure. And so you always there's big feelings, and what I'm most cognizant of and we need to be careful is that the parents or the caregivers know the truth, that that we're not letting this student. The last thing you want to have happen is parents find out, their kid lied to them about what really happened. I've had some uncomfortable times where the kid had only told half the story and then they presented themselves as a victim, and so they're like, oh, in fact, you used a racial slur that started this whole fight, but you never mentioned that, or whatever it might be. So there's an art to it. But one of the things that we really are careful to do is to make sure that we are having the whole story before we start. But so I know that we're actually getting close to the end of our time, so I want to make sure I cover this after my fireside chat about Dylan. But one of the intentions with our students in restorative practice is to help kids, as I've said, take responsibility for their behavior, understand how it impacts others, help them learn to repair in a supportive, loving way that doesn't add additional shame to them, but actually empowers their sense of self. We want to, of course, avoid exclusionary discipline as often as we can. This does not preclude, if something serious happens, game on. If you bring a weapon to school, we're not having a friendly chat about it. We'll have that chat when you come back, because even when kids go to Long Creek, God forbid, they eventually come back to school. So that repair still does need to happen. It might not happen with people who are harmed. It might be broader than that. And so we're just having that conversation with the student and maybe their caregivers and support staff, school counselors, etc. But we do want to make sure that everyone feels safe when someone returns to school, and that's the child who made the mistake as much as the person who's been harmed. And then again, help them develop strategies to respond in a healthy way. And for school staff, we want to help them build better relationships with each other. I will say when on my first year visits to schools, what struck me most is the tension between the adults in the buildings. They don't necessarily trust each other. They're not having consistent responses to typical behavior, which drives a wedge between the adults in the building. If I'm enforcing the phone policy and the teacher next door is not, I had a student like, why are you such a witch about the phones when Miss Forrestal doesn't care? And I didn't care what the kid thought, but I was like, yeah, why doesn't Michelle have my back? And so we're making sure that we're addressing those things and having those skills to have those complicated conversations. And then we want to empower our staff to handle minor behaviors in the classroom rather than sending kids out all the time. And that's primarily because if I have a conflict with a student in my classroom, I send them to the principal. The principal can have a fabulous conversation about all that, but the damage isn't between the principal and the kid. The damage is between me and the kid. So how do we preserve that relationship? And that really starts with intentionally centering, building a solid foundation of relationship. So in our program, we start with the first 6 weeks, the first part of the year, we spent at least 6 weeks teaching staff how to intentionally build relationships with their students through community building circles. It's, little kids, we see this a lot, but with older students, something that takes 10 minutes, 10 minutes once a week. It sounds like it sounds trite, but what I learned in my research, but also in my own experience, is that teachers will tell you they have a great relationship with all their students. And I had a great relationship with my heavy hitter kids. The kids were in trouble a lot, spent a lot of time with them. I thought a lot about why are they doing this, kind of going upstream. And then I had a great relationship with my students who were struggling emotionally, maybe had anxiety or depression, didn't come to school a lot, had low affect. When they were at school, I was really attentive to them and checked in because I was worried about them. But I realized that the kids in the middle, the kids who were passing, getting a C minus, but they're going to get the credit. No trouble in class at all. I might go a week or two without hearing their voice ever. They just don't. We're not interacting because they're not on fire like the kids at the two extremes. But my research uncovered, and then this has been supported by other researchers' work, is that dangerous school behavior, kids who, God forbid, are a school shooter or do dangerous things at school, are coming out of that middle group. The kids who feel like no one cares if they come to school, that they're not safe, and that they don't matter. So even something as simple as this week in our community building circle, I say to you, pineapple on pizza, yes or no? Do you think that's a good idea? How do you feel about that? Which seems so silly. But then this student that barely talks says, I love pineapple on pizza. You should try it, whatever. And then one day I said, you know what? I tried it and you were right. That is simple, like a way to start building those touch points. Or I had a student who we did an activity where we asked the students in the whole building, so not just my program, who is the one adult in the building you would go to with an emergency or that would help you with anything, even if it's not an academic thing. And a student identified me who I'd never had in class. And so the next time I saw him, I said, how come, why, I think you're a great kid, but why me? He's like, well, one day you told me I had a really cool hat on. And then you introduced yourself and you asked me my name. He's like, and then every time I've seen you since then, you say, good morning, Eric. And he said, and some days you're the only person that says my name the whole day, which was shocking to me, but also a really good lesson about you never know, how, like, what a difference something that simple will make. So we train schools and staff to build time into their schedules to build those relationships. And there is pushback, there's reluctance because people feel like they don't have time, but I promise that those 10 minutes once a week in your calculus class or whatever it might be, will cut down on so much wasted time handling behaviors. Because when I think you care about me and I know I care about you, if there's conflict, there's a reason to repair that relationship. If I think you don't like me, or you've been a real creep in class, and I don't really, why would I be motivated to fix that? But but wanting to restore that relationship to harmony really matters, and so you do get to that space where the students really do want you to like them and to feel good and comfortable in each other's space. So the program that we offer is, first of all, it's free for all schools in Maine, pre-K through 12. But so the way it works is that a school identifies an implementation team or a leadership team of people that are going to be from their building that are sort of the on-site leaders for the initiative. Of course, it needs to be someone who handles student behavior, so a dean or principal or assistant principal, but also social worker or school counselors. And then you want teachers, ed techs. I had the custodian that I mentioned with Dylan, he was on my team. You can have parents. Middle school and high school can certainly have students on this team as well. And I always say, please bring us your biggest consumers of the code of conduct, the kids who are in trouble a lot. They have a lot to teach us about what we're doing wrong as far as responding to behavior. And also, if you want to see someone grow in front of you, bring a kid who's always in trouble and give them an opportunity to be a leader. It's life changing. You can see that life change right in front of you. But we train that team. So we come to each school in person. We don't have regional trainings. We go to you. And this training ends up being, it's in person about 20 hours. So usually about 3 school days, but schools can split it up in 4-hour increments. Anything less is kind of too hard. Just get your groove and then it's time to go home. But and then we go to the school, and some schools do 3 straight days. Some do every other Monday for 4 hours. It's totally their call. Each school is assigned 2 coaches that stay with them forever as long as you need them and supporting this initiative. And so the people on the implementation team are trained in all of these topics. Those of you who are in education, the green is tier 1, or things that are for all students and all staff. So this is where we're focusing on relationship building, community building circles, collaboratively I'm having trouble with that word, collaboratively creating norms or classroom rules. And then tier 2 is for students who sometimes get in trouble. This is where we focus on responding to minor behaviors in real time. So the yellow things are the tier 2. So for some students, and then 10, 11, and 12 are for the tier 3, or kids who are really, serious behaviors like Dylan's, like I described, like likely to result in a suspension, maybe even an expulsion. I've been hearing a lot of expulsions without services stories lately, which is appalling to me. And then, or maybe even a legal charge. And then also, how do we bring those kids back to school in a way that's most likely to guarantee, their success? And then the last piece is helping make a plan to roll this out in your school. So your implementation team is trained in all of these 15 topics, but then the rest of your staff, and that staff could be all teachers and ed techs, but also whatever your school decides, obviously, but office staff, cafeteria folks are certainly invited into it, custodial staff, bus drivers. And these modules, we also created online modules that are asynchronous, that live at Eastern Maine Community College on their Brightspace. If you watch module intro through 9, it's 2 hours and 38 minutes. But what most schools do is we break it up like 2 a month, and then the members of the restorative implementation team, we break them into small groups, and you watch them together and discuss and do activities. So most schools take about a semester to work their way through it, but when they're done, when people are finished, staff get 2 CEUs or 20 contact hours towards their certification, which is a big deal in the education world because you're forever having to renew. It feels like you just finished renewing your certification and now you got to do it again. All this is free. They also get a badge that says they've had a completion of introductory restorative practices. And then the implementation team gets 30 hours or 3 CEUs because they've done a little more work. And then we also, your coaches stay with your school, check in at least before you start. We have a whole staff introduction. And then after each tier, so after community norm setting circles, I'm actually going to a couple schools next week to check in, see how it went with the staff. And then again, after the tier 2 stuff. We don't train the whole staff in these red modules because what happens is people get a little excited and start trying to have conferences because someone, I don't know, wouldn't put their phone away. And these are really, again, for really serious behaviors, and they're labor intensive. And a community building circle, again, should take 10 minutes or less. So I'm also, we were really intentional about understanding how tight time is already for teachers. So we want to make sure that what we're asking them to do has the benefits outweigh the time that's lost. So we also, just to let you know, all these components are free to schools. We have an elementary and also middle high school student curriculum that can be used in advisory or homeroom that follows the same module process, except for the collegial relationships. For the middle and high school, we focus on, well, actually for elementary too. For elementary, what does it mean to be a good friend? And middle and high school, what does it mean to be a good friend? But also, what are healthy romantic relationships? Because that is a drama source in the middle and high school areas. We have parent programs, one to explain the behavior response changes, but also a separate program that's voluntary that we would offer in the evenings for parents to learn to use these same skills at home with their kids if they want to. And often I would have parents say, when my students were in trouble, I don't know what to do with him at home either. So it was really a great bridge building tool so that like we were speaking the same language and parents would check in and say, how are we going to restore this? And that was really, it really made a big difference. We have modules that will be released in the spring for school nurses because kids tell school nurses all the things. We have also working on bus driver modules. You think that often your school bus driver is the longest relationship you have in your education. You might have the same bus driver from pre-K till you're cool enough to drive yourself to school. So there's, that could be 12 years that you're with the same bus driver. They're also the first person that sees you every day from school, the last one that sees you at the end of the day, and also often the only person from school who sees what's happening at your house. So I got a lot of information from our bus drivers in my program that would say, hey, when I dropped Sean off last night, the police were there again. Or looks like mom's sobriety has ended. Or, oh, their power's been turned off. Things that, I wouldn't know, but I was so grateful for that information because I knew to handle that student with extra care that day. Or maybe even check in the access resources for that family. Back to what we're trying to work on with our MPN partners is creating a restorative code of conduct, not only for vaping support, but also for all of your code of conduct rules. It's actually in statute in Maine that schools' code of conduct should include a restorative language and a restorative response. But that happened in 2011 and no one ever defined it. So how do we modify schools' code of conduct to be in alignment with what you're doing? And then the last piece that we're working on is something called youth diversion teams, which is a collaborative piece with local law enforcement, district attorney's office, local mental health professionals, and then mentors from the community as well as the school. So that when a student is starting to show either has a touch point with the juvenile justice system or is starting to show maybe mental health troubles that are getting that are escalating, we address them sooner as a team and help the student get the resources they need, the family get the resources they need. They can kind of jump the DHHS line if they need counseling, and then try to find ways to support that student. Often it's mentors in the community in a way that is a little outside of the traditional education response, but really helping that student to recognize what's going on with them and keep them out of the legal system if we can. And then just the process really for schools is to check in with me. And I'm happy to meet with schools if Lisa at your school, if your administration wanted to meet with me or you wanted to have a deeper conversation, I'm happy to do it. I certainly have gone to school boards and talked to them. Generally speaking, it takes a couple months from the first contact, but to get the program going. But we do have availability. This is a program that can start at any point in the school year. It doesn't need to wait till September. So certainly we have a bunch of schools starting in January, and then another group set to start in March. So it's just an all rolling thing, but we do have availability. The school chooses their team, their training dates. We come to you and offer that training at whatever location you choose. Sometimes it's hard for principals and school counselors, especially if the other staff knows they're in the building, they get pulled out all day long. So sometimes we try to go like to the district office or something so that the folks can be able to be there without being pulled out. We create a staff training plan for the whole building. The staff does the modules on EMCC, and then we just continue. If you want to use the student curriculum, we support you with that, for the parent programming, and then the staff is available. Your coaches are available to support you ongoing. And I did share these slides with Alyssa, so if anyone wants them, do you mind sharing them out, Alyssa? Okay, awesome. And then just to let you know about the Safety Center, because a lot of people don't know about it. Some of the programs we have, restorative practices is what we were just talking about, creating a culture of care. It's for the whole school, and it's asynchronous modules as well as in-person facilitation. We also have something called behavioral threat assessment management, which is when a student makes a threat. It's a protocol that happens very quickly in real time, like now, like in the next 5 minutes when people become aware. Is this a threat where we need to, does this kid, so a kid says, I've had it, I'm going to blow this school up. Do we call the SWAT team or do we give him a snack? Like how mercifully, most of the time a kid makes a threat, 97% of the time it's unsubstantiated and that it's just someone's having a bad day. But how do we know? What's the process? So this is a way of teaching a small team in each school, how do we respond to that? So that one, we're not suspending or arresting kids who don't need to do that, but really are just hungry and grouchy, or that there's a backstory that we didn't know. But also, how do we respond and have a plan when we do need to move? And something needs to happen quickly. We also have a program. We have school emergency management. So we have a program called School Safety Specialists, which trains people a little bit in all of these situations. So fundamentals of school safety, climate and culture, emergency planning, as well as restorative practices and behavioral threat assessment. And then we also have members of our team who will come to help with emergency operation planning. And one, like an example is there's a school in York County that is, since it was built and since the last time they made an emergency operation plan, a propane company has bought the building next door and has a huge tank where you can come fill up your barbecue tank, like literally 150 feet from the front door of this elementary school. So what's the plan if something goes wrong with the propane tank? So really reviewing it. And no one is in trouble if their plan is not up to date. This is really just supporting schools with like, hey, if your school bus garage is on the other side of the railroad tracks and a train derails and there's something that's leaking and your buses can't get to school because they're on the bus depots on the other side of the railroad tracks, how do we get kids out of school? Just those kind of tabletop considerations that, luckily they rarely happen, but no one wants to be the person in charge if it does. And then also, we also have a person who looks at safety and security of the school, not active shooter drills, but more like, do your doors locked? What's the quickest way out of a building? Those type of things that use review. So just, again, I shared with Alyssa just this information, just so you have it to share with your school, just in case they don't know. But again, all of these programs are free from the Maine School Safety Center and they're accessible to everyone. So that was a lot. So sorry. Are there any questions or any thoughts anyone wants to share? I feel like I've just for an hour and a half.
I don't have any questions, but I thought it was really helpful.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, it's I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. We originally had our grant. The first year was to train 5 schools, and I've yet to advertise this other than like meetings like this. And the first year we trained 42 schools that people just heard about it and they're like, bah, things are out of control. So there's certainly a big need for it. And we've trained schools as small as one in the Cotton district whose graduating class last year was 7 kids, all the way up to schools that have 1,500 student body. So it's really applicable to everyone, every community. I used to think it was really like, I grew up in Chicago. I'm like, well, this is a city program, until I started to think about being a kid in a town who does a dumb thing in 7th grade, and you're multi-generationally living in that town. And when I think about like my student who set the bathroom trash can on fire, like now he was just showing off, but now he's become the town arsonist. So how do we, like those stories that stick with kids, or I in Kennebunk you probably have a luxury of, okay, these 2 kids are not getting along, we're going to move on to a different team. You don't have a different team when there's only 7 kids in the senior class. So we have to repair that harm. Otherwise, it's just going to make everyone's life miserable for the rest of the year. So I'm happy to chat more about this with anyone who's interested. Certainly, if your school is interested, or if you have any thoughts, or there's pieces that you think are missing, then you're like, wow, I'd really love to see more of that. This is a live document, so to speak. So we're always adding and taking our data and saying, okay, what can we do better? How can we be more helpful to schools? So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk to all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. I thought that was great. A lot of information.
Yes, it is.
And your story was amazing. I think it really hit the nail on the head.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
I just have a quick question before
Yeah, of
we wrap
course.
up. And we do, have more time if people have additional questions, but of course we won't make you stay. You're busy people. I'm wondering um, so and not to put you on the spot, Lisa, but for instance, like Lisa's here. Lisa, as far as I know, you're still teaching health, middle school health classes, correct?
Yeah.
So, like what maybe smaller steps can Lisa do, or like maybe another staff watches this recording and they're like, well, I don't really know that the administration's ready to make all these changes, but like, how can I start to practice and model some of this work? Like, do you have any
Yeah,
suggestions for maybe
sure.
like starting this at a small scale for folks that might um
I
not
would, yeah, I
be
would start
ready
with like
to
the
go
question of
big?
the day. Like I have a teacher who had been doing, she called them the attendance questions, but she would have like a provocative question, nothing serious, but the same kind of questions we might ask every day, like I don't know. What did she just tell me the other day? Oh, who's your favorite Marvel character was one of them. So on her board should have today's attendance question and just go around. As she's taking attendance, you say, okay, like I get to Regan. So who's your favorite Marvel? Just starting to have those like simple relationship bridge building conversations. That again, because you're taking attendance anyway, and they're giving you a 1 or 2 word answer. It sounds so silly, but it really makes a difference. Or even things like, we're gonna have our check-in fist to five, like fist being like couldn't have sucked more, five being like never better. Just a quick like how are you doing today? Or I always got so much information from fist to five. How did you sleep last night? Like there is a lot of information if your student's like I didn't sleep, like okay they're gonna be grouchy today, or just those quick little check-ins to start building relationships, and you'll see. I mean, I got to the point with my students, about halfway through the year every year that I didn't even if I someone was acting ridiculous, I could just say, really, and that's all I had to say because they wanted to be in right relationship with me. Um, so, whatever's, and this is what I say to schools all the time. Like, if what you're doing is working, I'm not saying throw out all your classroom management skills at all. This is just another tool, another way of reaching students who you might not have reached before. And then we're working on a video right now. It gets really fun to let your students start to lead those questions, or let Lisa could let students say, okay, who wants to come up with a question for tomorrow, vet it. I had some pretty tough times with high school kids ask some pretty provocative sex questions in the middle of circle time. Like, oh no, we're not asking that. But we have a video now that at Falmouth Elementary of a pre-K class where the students are leading the circle. So it really is something that kids can do, and they really like to take ownership. And I thought my high school kids would think that's oh, that's queer. They thought everything was queer. They loved it. They loved it. So it's surprising how much, especially because they live in a cyber world, how much they crave that actual human connection. And they also don't really have the social skills, so it's also a way of modeling social skills and emotional language. They have three emotions: happy, sad, and pissed off. So modeling, it sounds like you're anxious. It sounds like you are, feeling maybe a little afraid or worried. Giving those words so that they can express themselves more clearly as well.
The other thing that I'll just throw in here as well is some of the work that we've been doing, and even our healthy eating active living team has been doing, is introducing restorative circles to staff in school. So like the school
Absolutely.
nutrition team, and going to visit the entire school nutrition department and talk about when there's conflict in the workplace, how are we repairing, right? And so
Absolutely.
I think not only can we, like at a smaller scale, look at what we can do in the classroom, but also just how we're showing up, and then engaging with our colleagues as well. So I think that's an opportunity that we can also support if there's additional opportunities to talk to staff around, just doing restorative circles within
Yeah,
the staff too.
I love that. And that is part of our training, that as we're, the groups are meeting, as the staff is going through the modules, most of the time, actually, I would say every time, the implementation will say, okay, they do a staff circle, but they're modeling what students would do, because they don't want, but then we'll also, there are times when, like, there's this tough conversation we have to have about whatever is happening with the adults. So we're going to use this process. Now we have this process that's safe for everyone to be able to have those tougher conversations too. And people really, one of the schools, Martian Middle, was saying that they were pinched for time the last time they got together in groups, and the staff's like, wait, we're not doing our circle. They actually had come to look forward to the staff circles. So it's a really nice thing. Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Regan, for reminding me of that.
In Kennybunk, we had actually spent our late start Wednesdays. So on Wednesday, the teachers are here like 2 hours before the kids are.
Uh-huh.
And we were working on restorative circles
Nice.
for the classroom, for advisory, for the staff. So it was nice that I heard that positive reinforcement of how that works. And I really agree with you with just a simple question at the beginning of class. So I get over 200 students semester, and then I get over 200 students second semester. And I always have an opening question that they do online. And then I take, 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5, going around and asking them. And sometimes that's the only time a student will actually voice anything in class.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it helps me learn their names. And it does build that relationship piece. And
I
I see
love
the
that.
kids have a much more positive behavior in the classroom, just because, they have my attention, and the kids know that when someone else is sharing, they can't be talking to the person next to them. We're all going to give this person our attention. So it makes a big, big difference on the kids.
I love that. Is Kennybunk still using restorative practice? I know, like 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was sort of a district initiative, and then I feel like it's quieted down since
I
then.
would say it's quieted down. The whole idea of vaping, I'm hoping to write a proposal for the assistant principal and the principal on instituting that restorative practice. So, if they are pulled out of class for that in-school suspension, maybe doing that first module for the Stanford University, where they are learning more about vaping, and then having like a second level. Okay, so that means that maybe they need to sit with guidance or the social worker and go through that teacher-led program after. So yeah, I was in the process of hoping to do that. I mentioned it to the assistant principal, and he was like, yeah, that'd be great, because we don't have anything.
It's
So,
hard. It's such a tough issue to address, for sure.
I mean, maybe I can think of, maybe a half a dozen kids out of the almost 500 we have. So the percentage is small, but, having those conversations with him, like, what was going on when you did this?
Exactly. And because it is so addictive, like,
Mm.
what's going on? Are they using it to numb their emotions? Are they, do they want to quit? Do they not want to quit? Do they even understand, like, what it's doing to their body? Probably not. Yeah,
Right.
there's
Well,
just so many.
because they go through the Catch My Breath program in 6th grade. So, yeah, we do the whole, what it does to your body, hoping that they can make the right choice, but they don't always.
Well, Lisa, you're our champion over at Kennybunk, so we're so appreciative that
At the
you're.
moment, I'm the only health teacher in the district, I'm afraid.
Oh my God, there's no one at the high school right now.
They're looking for someone. They're hoping to get somebody to fill the position.
Well, I missed last week's wellness committee because I was not well. I just had I've had a cold. That kind of sounded harsh. But I there's I will be at those in the future. And I've been trying to, touch base with folks there. And then there's been sort of like a prevention collaborative initiative. I'm not sure if you've heard about that I've been attending those. So I'm trying to force myself into to these places, but certainly if you want to talk more about your proposal, if you want my help or input, or me to just squeaky wheel gets the grease, if you want me to try to poke at people or whatever, please let me know. Happy to do what I can.
That would be great. A second set of eyes is always a good thing.
Yes, I am finishing up my Master of Public Health degree right now, so I'm a little reading is low, but at the same time, hopefully I'm sharp because I'm in practice of writing writing graduate level things.
Right. Sounds good.
Yeah, great. Well, anything else we want to chat about, or we're ready to go home because the sun's setting?
Stacey, thank you again. Thanks for
Oh, my
being
pleasure.
here. And we'll certainly share the recording with others that I know were registered and didn't attend, and for whatever reason, but we'll make sure to save the recording. And thank you, Laura and Lisa, both for your time and being here as well.
Right, thank you, everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving. And
Thanks.
I'm sure I'll catch
Thank
up with
you.
all of you
You
soon.
too.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.